الحمد لله رب العالمين وأصلي وأسلم على من بعث رحمة للعالمين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today our topic is rethinking the Qur'an for Ramadan. Inshallah we'll be talking about how to approach this Ramadan, which will be different anyway for many of us, for all of us perhaps. How to approach this Ramadan in terms of the Qur'an slightly differently. How can we rethink our approach to the Qur'an for this Ramadan? Hassan al-Basri, this is from the first three generations, so we're talking about 1300 years ago. He said, although the Qur'an was revealed so that people would act on its laws and principles, however, people have taken its recitation as a deed in itself. What does this mean? He's saying the Qur'an was revealed. This is Hassan al-Basri, great scholar of Islam, muhaddith, faqih, zahid, He says that the Qur'an was revealed so that people will act on its laws and principles. However, people have taken its recitation as a deed in itself. In other words, people are approaching the Qur'an and imagining that the recitation, the mere reading of the Qur'an, tilawa, khatam of the Qur'an, or just reciting the Qur'an, is the actual deed or the actual action that's required from the Qur'an, and they just stop there. But the Qur'an's purpose was to be acted upon. Its laws, its principles, its exhortation, its commanding the good, forbidding the evil, its reminders, its stories, its principles, its ethics, all of these things were meant to be understood and acted on. In other words, for many of us, I mean that was 1300 years ago or more. For many of us, this is our current reality, right? But we've added one more problem to that statement, because he's saying it at a time when everybody or most people in his time, in his geographical location, understood the Quran. They spoke Arabic, they understood Arabic. But we've taken it a step further. Not only do we just recite it instead of understanding it and acting on it, instead of acting on it, we also don't understand it. Most of us don't understand the Quran as we're reciting it. Some people say, well, what's wrong with that? It's an ibadah. We get 10 rewards for every letter. And, it brings peace to my heart. It boosts me, it gives me motivation. I feel good when I recite the Quran. So what if I don't understand it? That's true to a certain extent, but we're missing the point if we have that attitude or if we think like that. Because what's the main purpose of communication or language? Is to convey meaning. The main purpose of speaking or communication, or especially language, is to communicate meaning for the person you're speaking to or addressing, for them to understand what you're saying. So the main purpose of a language or communication is missed if simply we hear it but we don't understand it. So if you don't understand German, it's no use you listening to German documentaries or radio programs or reading a book in German. There's no purpose because you don't understand it. So similarly, the Quran has come in the Arabic language, and its main purpose is to understand the Quran. Its main purpose is Hidayah, but you can't get that Hidayah without understanding the Quran. The main purpose of the Quran is to grant us guidance, is to guide us in every aspect of our lives. The most important thing for people to achieve in this world and the next is guidance, is Hidayah. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ألف لام ميم ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه هدى للمتقين. That is the book in which there is no doubt, a guidance for those of taqwa, for the muttaqeen. So it's been revealed as a book of guidance. That's the main purpose. Quran and Ramadan have the same purpose. The month of the month of Ramadan is called the month of Qur'an. شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن. It's the month of Qur'an in which the Qur'an was revealed. And we know the purpose of Ramadan, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, so that you may gain taqwa. So the guidance is for people of taqwa. Ramadan is also, the objective is to gain taqwa. So we have this dual kind of objective combining together the month of Ramadan and the Quran. What does Hidayah mean? What does it mean that the purpose of the Quran is guidance? What does the Quran mean when it says that? Guidance is, in English, literal sense, is to, you can be guided literally to move from one place to another, from your starting point, from A, to your destination, to B or C. And a guide or instructions or a map will take you there, will show you the way. Just like, any kind of instructions, you can call it a guide because it leads you to your objective. The Quranic objective is guidance to what? What does it lead us to? It leads us to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala generally, but it also leads us to the mode of behavior or being that Islam wants us to be in. The mode of behavior or being that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to be in. In other words, it leads us to the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, number one, but also how we're meant to act and behave, how we're meant to be on that path. So taqwa kind of sums that being, if you like, the state of being, how we should be acting and behaving. You can summarize it as taqwa because that's a very broad concept, which means, in other words, you're doing whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is asking you to do throughout your life, throughout different aspects of your lives, and you're staying away from those things that He's asking you to stay away from. But it's also much more than that. It's not just halal, haram, amr and nahi. It's not just that. It's much wider and broader and encompasses so many areas of our lives. But broadly, that's what Hidayah means, to be guided on the path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to be guided in many levels. Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah says there's over 10, 12, 13 different levels of guidance, and he says you can't finish those levels of guidance. That's why we are required to be reading Surah Al-Fatiha in every salah, in other words, minimum 17 times a day, because we're so much in need of guidance. We constantly need guidance. It's so important. Hence, we're required to recite Surah Fatiha, which is the core ask in Surah Al-Fatiha is what? Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim. Guide us to the straight path. So guidance is really important. It's very broad. It has many levels. And the purpose of the Quran is to guide us in this life to the next life, so that we reach success with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We live a life according to how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to live, and a life that will be pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But how does the Quran guide us? What's the mode of the Quran guiding? The Quran doesn't just guide like a Google map with a list of instructions or just showing you the way. The Quran guides you by infusing your senses, moving your heart, astounding your intellect, appealing to your reason, and firing your emotions by moving through every fiber and cell in your body. That's the Quranic approach, so that your whole being is animated to act, is moved, is motivated, is stirred to act according to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's guidance, according to His advice, according to His instructions. That's how the Quran instructs us. It's not a dry list of 1, 2, 3, do this, don't do this. No. We'll talk a little bit more about this in terms of the style, approach of the Quran, in terms of how it guides us. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, if we had revealed this Quran upon a mountain, you would have seen it humble itself, shaking, humble itself, and rent asunder from the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل لرأيته خاشعا متصدعا من خشية الله وتلك الأمثال نضربها للناس لعلهم يتفكرون. And these are the parables that we give, or similitudes that we lay for mankind so that they may think. So Allah says this Qur'an, if it was revealed on a mountain, you would have seen it humbled, shaking, and smashed to pieces. The power, the weight of the Qur'an. So the Qur'an affects, impacts, creates movement. It has an impact. It's meant to have an impact, a powerful impact. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says that if a Qur'an were to move mountains and to cut through the earth, it would have been this Qur'an. Meaning this Qur'an is not just a list of instructions. It's a powerful communication that's meant to transform you and me, that's meant to transform families, that's meant to transform communities. It's meant to have an impact, and it has had. We've seen the impact that the Qur'an had in a space of 23 years with the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba. Historically, we know that the Quran literally took a small group of people in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of a desert, with very little resources, and within a short space of time, they burst forth onto the world's platform in terms of civilization, in terms of knowledge, in terms of science, in terms of spreading throughout the known world. It had that impact. One of the Sahabi who, before he became Muslim in Mecca, he heard the Prophet ﷺ recite a verse of the Quran and in Salah. And he was walking past and he heard the Prophet ﷺ recite a verse of the Quran. This Sahabi who at that time wasn't a Muslim, he said, I felt my heart was about to fly out of my chest because of the words of the Quran. This is, the impact it had, the power of the Quran. The Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says, the meaning of tilawa, to recite, to read. Because Hassan al-Basri is talking about the two sides of this understanding of the Quran. One is tilawa, reading. The other one is understanding and acting on it. And he says that we've taken reading as the action. But if we see in the Quran, reading itself, tilawa, الَّذِينَ آتَيْنَهُمُ الْكِتَابَ يَتْلُونَهُ حَقَّ تِلَاوَةٍ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, those whom we gave the book, they recited a true recitation, حَقَّ تِلَاوَةٍ. Some people say this was revealed to the people of the book. Majority of the Mufassirun say this. But there are some who also say it applies to the Quran as well. Regardless, the meaning here, they recited a true recitation. The Mufassirun said that they recite it with meaning. They understand what is being read. They understand the communication. They understand the contents of what is being read. So how does the Quran guide us? How does it appeal to us? What's the mechanism? What's the method of the Quran guiding or communicating to us with the objective of guiding us? The Quran actually guides us by appealing to our fitrah. The Quran guides us, moves us, motivates us, reminds us by appealing to our fitrah. Fitrah means our natural state, if you like, the way we've been created originally by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our natural state, our primordial state, if you like. The fitrah has certain characteristics. It needs to know, every human being, even as a small child, the most common repetitive question a child will ask is why? What is this? Why? Why does this happen? Curiosity to know, if you like. The second thing is the need for ubudiyah. Every human being has a need to worship, has a need to submit to something of a higher power. Every human being has this in his or her fitrah, in his or her nature. And the third is to praise our Creator, to praise a higher power. This is a need in the human being. So in terms of the first one, the need for knowledge, ilm, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I have not created the jinn and mankind except to worship me. As we know, the famous saying of Ibn Abbas, as related by many of the Mufassirun, that he said it means, Allah created the jinn and the mankind. In the Quran it says, except He did not create the jinn and the mankind except to worship me. Ibn Abbas says, meaning except to know me, knowledge. He didn't create mankind and jinn except to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ibadah, through ubudiyah, through worship, that's how you know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Qur'an satisfies our fitri needs, our three major needs of our fitrah. Knowledge is one thing. And the Quran is full of knowledge. It tells us about the past, it tells us about the present, it tells us about the future, it tells us about the seen world, and it tells us about the ghaib, right? The unseen world. It fulfills that need for knowledge of truth. Where did we come from? Where are we going? What's the purpose of life? All of this is contained in the Quran. The need for ibadah, the second one was the fitri need for ibadah. The Quran commands us, tells us how to do ibadah, how to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala properly. It tells us about the ma'bud, about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who is being worshipped. We need to know who is our creator. We need to know how do we please him, how do we worship him. The Quran gives us all of that. And the third is to praise the creator, or to praise a higher power. This is also a fitri need in the human being. The Quran tells us how to do that. Some of the scholars said that the whole of Sharia is nothing but how to show gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The whole of Sharia, when a human being follows the guidance of Sharia, of Islam, all of their actions amount to gratitude, shukr. When you pray, when you fast, when you give in charity, when you stay away from haram, when you do as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks us to do, when you're kind to others, when you put a smile for your brother, all of the actions you do because of Islam amounts to shukr, gratitude. What is gratitude? What is shukr? Using the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has favored you with and benefited you with and granted you, your intellect, your body, your time, your wealth, in the service of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is gratitude, and through that you realize that you need to praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why Surah Al-Fatiha again begins with what? It begins with Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. It begins with all praise belongs to Allah, the Lord of the worlds. All praise belongs to Allah, the Lord of the worlds. Because our need is to praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Once you realize our dependency, once you realize the favors, once you realize you didn't come to this life by accident, everything that we have, the joys, the favors, the benefits, the blessings from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this moves us to show gratitude, to show praise, to praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah has given us our senses. How do we do these three things? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given our senses, a rational mind and a heart. So through the senses, our seeing, our hearing, our touch, through these senses, the human being perceives and draws in data and information. The mind, the aql that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, that organizes this information, this data, this whatever it is, visual, hearing, whatever it is, the mind organizes it. And then the heart is the one that decides to act on it or not act on it, right? This is very simple, very basic explanation of how the human body works, or how the human being works in terms of our nature. The Quran appeals to this nature. Through the Quran, we hear the exhortations, we hear the advice, we hear the commands, we hear the reminders, we hear the questions, we hear the order to reflect on the universe and on the creation. We hear all that. It speaks to our nature to praise, to do ibadah, right? And to know knowledge. It speaks to that, right? It speaks to all of that. And then it's the heart that acts, right? It's the heart that acts. So the Quran's approach is not simply to give you rational arguments. It's not simply to say, here's a list, Allah is the creator, you must do X, Y, and Z, that's it. Or it doesn't go out to prove the existence of God. In some verses it does as a supplementary thing, but it already assumes it's natural to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It already assumes you want to worship. It already assumes, it's not an assumption because it's coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's the truth. Allah knows that you have a need to worship Him. Allah knows that you have a need to praise Him. Allah knows that you have a need to know ilm. So the Quran approaches us through these mediums, if you like, and it addresses our thirst for these things, our thirst for knowing these things. So if we, now you can begin to understand that if we simply read the Quran, recitation without meaning, how do we achieve these things? How can we allow the Quran to impact us if we're simply reading without meaning? And unfortunately, many of us, because of the way we've been brought up, the way the Quran was introduced to us at an early age, our method is one of learning how to proficiently read the Quran. That's all. As long as we can read, that's it. My son, my daughter, he's finished the Quran, which means he's done one khatam of reading without understanding. So because of our cultural norms and the way we've been introduced to the Quran, many of us, although some of this is changing now, but many of us are not engaging with the Quran in terms of the level of understanding and meaning. If we engage regularly with the Quran, with reflection and understanding, we will be reminded of our true purpose here, which will help us to prioritize and keep aligned to the guidance of the Quran, how we're meant to act, what we're meant to do, what should be my priority in life. All of these things will be answered, or at least there'd be more clarity towards these questions in our lives. It will motivate to act, to change those things within us that require changing according to the Quranic criteria. In terms of priorities, all of us have priorities in our lives, but our priorities, if you list them 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you go to the Quran, what is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminding us of? What priorities does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have for us? You'll see there's always a difference. Whatever I'm putting first, second, third in my life, it'll be different from what's in the Quran. The Quran is calling us to akhirah. The Quran is calling us to ubudiyah, to servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Quran is calling us for the eternal life, the eternal success, not the temporary success of this dunya. The Quran is calling us to generosity. The Quran is calling us to high morals, of character, of good behavior, of helping and assistance and cooperation between other people. The Quran is calling us to sacrifice. So many things, the Quran is calling us to, but overall the main priority is, if you like, is the next world, the hereafter, whatever benefits us in this life for the next world. That is the overriding priority. So this will only happen if we engage with the Quran with meaning, with recitation, with meaning. Not to mention that it will strengthen our iman once we understand it. It will increase our iman and strengthen it as well. What happens is if we don't engage with the Quran, what happens is if we don't engage with the Quran with understanding and meaning regularly, this leads to a stagnation in our personal religious growth. It leads to a stagnation often in our ibadat, in our worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in our salah, the quality of our salah, our ability to sacrifice for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our ability to prioritize things that will benefit ourselves in the hereafter. These things happen when we are not engaging with the Quran, we're not reflecting on the Quran, We're not following or acting, as Hassan al-Basri said, we're not acting on the principles and the laws and the requirements or the advice and nasiha of the Qur'an. It also, many of us complain we hit, a temporary emotional or spiritual wall where we can't move forward, we can't seem to move forward, we can't seem to improve in our religious level, if you like. No matter where we are, no matter from someone who's on a very basic level to someone who's on a better level, on a medium level, on a higher level, people hit a plateau. People hit a wall, if you like. They can't seem to improve, right? Again, the Quran is a solution for this. Regularly understanding, reciting, reflecting, and acting upon the Quran will help us to get out of this. We feel this most through Ramadan, and especially after Ramadan. What happens is in the month of Ramadan, we all rush to the masajid. Alhamdulillah, obviously this year will be different. But usually in normal Ramadan, we all rush to the masajid. Main objective in the evening is to listen to the Quran in Taraweeh, to complete the whole Quran. We do this, we feel good, we have an iman boost, the ambience, the environment, the emotions are all there. It's beautiful, alhamdulillah. But we've listened to the whole Quran straight as soon as Ramadan is finished. What is our reaction? What is our state? Within a very short time, that boost, that iman boost that we felt, that emotion, that spiritual high starts to dissipate, It goes down very sharply within a very short time. This is another problem of not engaging with the Quran with meaning, because we've engaged with it the whole month in Ramadan simply by listening to the recitation for many of us without understanding and reflection and meaning. It's simply been the recitation, and there's benefit in recitation without a doubt. There is benefit in recitation. It allows us at least a feeling of tranquility. There's reward in recitation as well. And it does have an impact, just mere recitation. But that's a secondary thing. It's not the main purpose of the Quran. So we complain straight away that, within a few days or few weeks of Ramadan, we're back to normal. We haven't really transformed ourselves. We haven't really changed that much. We slip back into the old ways. We don't seem to have strengthened our resolve, determination, our practice, our closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It seems to all fall back to how we were before Ramadan. And one of the reasons is because we're not reflecting and understanding on the Quran and then taking action to follow the Quran or to implement the Quran. This is one of the major problems. And this is why Hidayah is needed at all times. This is why in the Salah, as I mentioned before, we're saying, guide us to the straight path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala 17 times a day. And this is why Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, he said that the reason why we're asked to do this 17 times a day minimum through our Salah is because the believer is in need of guidance. Every human being is in need of guidance, and the guidance are of many levels. It doesn't finish. It's not just that you enter Islam, you're guided, khalas. No, that's a very initial level of guidance between Iman and Kufr. If you've been born as a Muslim or you've accepted Islam, alhamdulillah, that's the biggest guidance, of course. That's step one. But then after that, there are many, many levels which we are constantly in need of. One of my teachers said he had a habit of reciting Quran and reflecting every morning. That was his habit. But he said, now I've added another slot. I do it twice a day now, every morning, and then in the afternoon as well, because I realize I'm in need of guidance, constant guidance throughout the day. It's not just in the morning. I need to be reminded. So Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, he says there's many levels of guidance that every believer needs in terms of running his life, decision making, choosing, whether you're in college, school, business, work environment, masjid, outside with your relatives, your family, your father, your parents, your children. There are so many affairs that the believer needs guidance every step of the way. Not to forget also that we need to be in constant hidayah, meaning so that there's ithbat, there's thubut, there's a firm, constant guidance that we're on. So hence the Quran, if we're not understanding it, if we're not reflecting on it, how can we expect this guidance to come to us? It's not going to come just by mere recitation. What blocks us? What are the obstacles for this guidance? What are the things that block us? Even if a person understands the Quran, even if you have, your faculties are working, your eyes, your ears, you can hear, you can read, you can understand. You read a translation, you can understand. And then it comes to your heart, but you don't act on it. Or there's other blockages. What are the obstacles for this? The reason why a person may understand the Quran or read the Quran or know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala demands of us and yet still doesn't act on it is, one of the major reasons is the heart, right? The purer the heart, the cleaner the heart, the easier it is for people to act upon the Quran and to listen to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's guidance, commands, instructions, and to implement the Quran. The more problematic our heart is, the more it is clouded with the effects of sin or disobedience, with the effects of ghafla, of heedlessness, of greed and jealousy, and all the diseases of the heart, which mainly arise from committing sins or not being on a committed path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The more clouded our hearts are, the more unclear our hearts are, the more difficult it is to implement the commands of the Quran, the more difficult it is to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more difficult it is to increase in our iman, increase in our guidance, etc., etc. So the first thing is that we need a pure heart, a clean heart. This is obviously, the Prophet ﷺ said, there's a piece of flesh in the body. If it is sound, then the whole body is sound. So the heart is the key. The heart is the key. But many things obstruct the heart. Like I said, committing sins is one thing, obviously. The dunya, you have this, the glitter of the dunya, the temporal nature which distracts us from the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You have your own nafs, you have your base desires, your hawa and your nafs that pull you constantly away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You have shaitan, you have the devil, your clear enemy, our clear enemy, who is also distracting us. So there are all these things happening, all these things going on that form obstacles to the heart. Because remember, decision making and acting and behavior is not simply knowing data. In public health, this is what they teach you. In public health, when they're trying to reduce, let's say, I don't know, when they're trying to reduce drinking or alcohol or drugs or cigarette smoking, they say giving the information is not enough. It needs to penetrate. There needs to be a further motivation. There needs to be a reason why people do this. But anyway, so these are the blockages that happen. What's the solution? Ramadan is literally 12, 13 days away. Ramadan is literally 12, 13 days away. Less than 2 weeks. What can we do different? How can we approach the Quran differently this Ramadan? Ramadan's objective, Ramadan is the best time to approach the Quran. It's the month in which the Quran was revealed, but we're in the best state. Why? Because the devils are locked up. We said the obstacles are your nafs, the dunya, the shaitan, right? The committing of sins that cloud the heart. In Ramadan, most people make tawbah. They stop sinning. The devils are chained up, right? You're in control of your nafs much more. You're hungry through the reduction of food intake and liquid. Our power over our desires is much greater. So the month of Ramadan is the perfect set of circumstances in which we as believers can receive the instructions of the Quran, internalize them, understand it, reflect on it, and then act upon it. This is the best time. So we must make the most of this month, inshallah, because our external circumstances, internal circumstances are perfect. There's no better time. in which to reflect on the Quran, and there's no easier time in which to act upon the Quran. We're at the peak of our capabilities to receive the Quranic guidance. So very quickly before I finish off, some tips around this. First of all, start with a pure and clear intention and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to open up the guidance of the Quran for you. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can make this Quran a means of Hidayah, transformation. The Prophet said, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Actions are but my intention. So make the intention clear and pure, right? And I'm talking intention to study the Quran, to with the Quran, to reflect and to read the Quran with understanding. I'm not talking about or doing khatam of the Quran. Secondly, leave all other intellectual, philosophical, sectarian baggages that you may have before you approach the Quran. Come to the door of the Quran with no baggage. Leave everything else. Be thirsty for guidance and knowledge. Thirdly, have a daily habit this Ramadan. Fix it, whether it's 10 minutes or an hour or half an hour, whatever you can do. And everyone, we've all got extra time during these unprecedented times. We have extra time. We have a lot more spare time. So whatever it is, manageable, 15 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour, fix that time. Make it a daily habit to read the Quran with a good, clear translation. There are many good translations out there now which are much more easier to understand, like the Clear Quran by, I forget his name, Khattabi, I think, or Professor Abdul Halim's Quran, new translation a few years back. Stick to this habit with a good, clear translation of the Quran. Fourthly, add, if you can, access a brief commentary of the Quran, a tafsir. Ibn Kathir is translated, it's online. There's other tafsirs that have been translated in part, not fully, but in part. There are many resources online. You can search and find that. This will enable you to understand and reflect a bit better. You'll understand the context, what the verse is alluding to, what it's saying, what's before it, what's its main message, etc. So a good clear translation with, if you can, if you have the time, add some tafsir to it in English or whichever language you can access. But even if you can't add the tafsir, even just the English, a good clear translation of the Quran. But the way to approach it is not just to read it, reflect, think. What is the Quran saying to me? What is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying here? Reflect and react. The Quran demands you a reaction from you. It demands you to act. It demands you to either think or to praise Allah or to seek refuge from the hellfire or to wonder at the delights of paradise or to reflect on the universe, the heavens and the earth, or to establish salah or to pay zakah or to be good to your parents. You know, the Quran demands action. So when you're on those verses, reflect and think, internalize it. Also try to increase your good actions through this month. So when you sit with the Quran, you understand it, you reflect on it, you internalize it, and then you act on it. Try to, of course, we can't increase our actions every single day. Practically, whatever we can do. If it's that extra 2 rakah of nafal prayer, if it's that extra charity, if it's that extra guarding our guarding ourselves from sins, whatever it is, that little bit extra, act and implement on the Quran, whichever verse or section you're in. Try your best to implement a little bit of it, whether it's extra dhikr, extra reflection, remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether it's extra remembrance of the hellfire or the paradise, or simply prioritizing your life, changing your life goals and priorities because of what you're reading in the Quran. After Ramadan, I have to wrap up now. After Ramadan, if you can, and most people really can if they really want to, try and take up the learning of the Arabic language. I know it's not possible for everyone. I know people are busy. It's not realistic for everyone. But if you can, many people can, right? Our scholar said it's wajib, it's fard, obligatory to learn the Arabic language as much as you are able to. And many people can. And there's so many resources out there now to enable you to do that online, in institutes. They're everywhere. So whoever can, do that. And also, if you can't do that, or if you can, in addition, attend a regular circle of Quran. tafsir or explanation, reading, reflection, whatever it is. There's many circles out there of Qur'an. So in this way, if we have a plan and program for Ramadan, inshallah you'll see a transformation in our own selves, or even if it's not a major transformation, even if it's an improvement from the previous year, that's still good. But the main thing is to change our attitude towards the Qur'an, that it's not just about khatam of Qur'an or recitation of Qur'an. It's about changing ourselves, transformation, just like the Sahaba did. They didn't memorize, not everybody memorized the Qur'an. They didn't do lots of khatam. They, in fact, transformed themselves and they transformed the world. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to understand His words, internalize them, reflect on them, and to implement and follow His guidance. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.